Welcome to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
So today we're looking into a recent conversation Douglas Murray had on the Free Press YouTube channel.
That's right. We're pulling at his thoughts on what the first 100 days of a second Trump presidency might look like, but also bigger cultural shifts and the rise in anti-Semitism.
Exactly. The goal here is really to give you a clear, kind of nuanced picture of these pretty complex issues, get past the headlines.
hmm And Murray uses this hypothetical first 100 days almost as a jumping off point, doesn't he? To talk about these much broader things. Policy, culture, prejudice, all interconnected.
Okay, so let's start there, those first 100 days. Murray immediately draws a contrast with Trump's first term.
Yeah, he suggests more preparation this time around, a real focus on getting loyalists in place.
Which, according to Murray, means maybe less pandemonium, a more orderly start, perhaps?
Potentially. Though, that focus on loyalty, it's interesting. Does loyalty always equal competence? Could it create a bit of an echo chamber?
That's a fair question. And then there's the sheer number of executive orders Murray anticipates.
Right. Possibly more than anyone since FDR, he mentions, which definitely signals an intent to move fast on policy.
He uses tariffs as an example, right? Following through on a campaign promise, which apparently surprised some people.
It does make you think, doesn't it? When keeping a promise becomes surprising. Domestically, he also points to claims of stopping illegal border movement and deporting undocumented immigrants with criminal records as, promises kept.
Okay, but then we get to foreign policy, and the picture Murray paints is, well, more complicated.
Yeah, he calls it a mixed bag and parts of it concerning.
That appointment of Steve Wickoff stands out. Envoy to end all wars.
I mean, the scope of that title, it's audacious, isn't it?
Absolutely. A
Yeah.
huge task for one person. And Murray sort of flags the gap between some promises like ending the Russia-Ukraine war on day one and, well, the reality.
Which is still ongoing, of course. Along with hostages still in Gaza, the Iran nuclear issue, JCPOA.talks mentioned.
And this seems to feed into these internal debates Murray describes within this potential administration.
Right, two broad camps, basically. You've got the muscular foreign policy people, the hawks, maybe like Mike Waltz.
And then the pulling back from the world camp, the restrainers, like J.D. Vance, perhaps.
And the core tension there is wanting America to be dominant, but also not wanting to be deeply involved everywhere. It's a tricky balance.
A fundamental conflict, really.
Yeah.
And it's apparently causing some nervousness among allies.
Definitely. Murray mentions concerns about a perceived softly approach to Putin, combined with maybe antagonism towards allies like Canada or Denmark. He brought up the Canadian election comments.
Which just seems counterintuitive if you want strong alliances.
It does, and it destabilizes things. Murray also notes, kind of curiously, that Marco Rubio isn't really seen leading on Russia, Ukraine, or the Middle East, despite his background.
Interesting. Then there's the Wickoff appointment again. Murray compares it to Kushner and the Abraham Accords.
Yeah, acknowledging the Accord's success, but questioning, putting another New York real estate figure into such a complex diplomatic role.
Learning on the job, essentially, in incredibly high-stakes situations.
Right. And Murray's reaction to Wickoff, apparently being surprised that Hamas weren't entirely honest interlocutors.
It says a lot, doesn't it?
It suggests maybe a lack of deep understanding of who they're dealing with. Same concern applies to potentially negotiating with Putin without grasping the history, or Iran without understanding their long game.
Which brings us to that Bernard Lewis point Murray raises.
Ah, yes, the different time horizons. The West thinks in election cycles, while others, like in the Muslim world, often think in decades.
That's crucial for understanding Iran's nuclear ambitions, isn't it? They have strategic patience.
Exactly, and it makes negotiating incredibly challenging. So Murray asks the big question, can Trump ensure Iran never gets a bomb? Not just on his watch. That's the real test.
Okay, let's shift gears quite significantly now. Murray talks about a vibe shift and this idea of the woke right.
Yeah, he's noticing a move from focusing on, let's say, illiberalism on the left to seeing a strain of it emerging on the right.
So what does he mean by woke right?
He defines it mainly through revisionist views of history. The key example he uses is attacking Winston Churchill, suggesting he was the real villain of World War II.
Wow, that's quite a take.
It is, and Murray finds it mirrors some of the things he criticized on the left regarding historical figures. He admits it's early days, but he's worried if it's not pushed back against.
He asks a really pointed question, too. What's the point of the victory beyond just, owning the libs?
Right. Cry Harder Lives isn't exactly a governing philosophy, is it? It points to a potential hollowness if a movement is only defined by opposition.
And he suggests this turn towards historical revisionism, especially on foreign policy, might stem from something specific.
Yeah, he links it to the Republican Party losing credibility with a generation of foreign policy experts after Iraq and Afghanistan.
Creating a kind of vacuum.
Exactly. A vacuum where maybe less credible uh, interpretations of things like World War II could gain traction because the established voices were distrusted.
And the Churchill revisionism, he gets specific there, comparing it to David Irvingism.
Yes, downplaying Nazi crimes while inflating Allied ones, arguing Churchill dragged America into the war. Murray is clear. It's historical nonsense, but potentially dangerous nonsense.
He does make a point of saying that the former president and someone like Rubio don't seem to hold these extreme views.
Which is important context. But his overall warning is stark, that this kind of thinking could completely pollute the side that it's on.
That's strong warning. And it leads us nicely into his appearance on Joe Rogan's podcast.
Right, quite a moment. He went on, ostensibly, to talk about his book, but then immediately confronted Rogan and Dave Smith.
Pretty bold, given Rogan's audience size. What drove that, do you think?
Murray puts it down to a personal policy, avoiding things that make him feel worse about himself. A kind of moral line he didn't want to cross by staying silent.
Silent about what, specifically?
About the lack of, let's say, mainstream expert voices on Rogan's show discussing Israel-Hamas or Russia-Ukraine. Instead, platforming what Murray calls kooky voices or semi-self-taught people lacking real expertise.
Uses that MMA analogy, right?
Yeah, saying Rogan is really discerning about expertise in areas he knows, like MMA, so why not apply the same standard to complex global conflicts?
That's a fair point. And he criticizes the defense of some of these pseudo-historians.
Right, the idea that you can't criticize them unless you've deeply studied their specific, often fringe, work. Murray equates it to someone confidently talking about a country they've never even visited.
He seemed genuinely surprised by the pushback, being called snooty or elitist for demanding basic standards.
He really doubled down on defending, journalistic legwork, doing the actual research, going to the places, talking to the people involved, especially in conflict zones, versus armchair analysis.
He uses that analogy about someone opining on China without speaking the language or having been there.
To show the absurdity of it, yeah. And he pushes back hard on the idea that this is about cancel culture.
How so?
He argues that demanding basic factual accuracy or condemning things like Holocaust denial isn't silencing debate, it's upholding necessary standards. Some stigmas, he insists, are entirely justified.
It's a distinction between open inquiry and promoting harmful falsehoods.
Exactly. He seemed particularly disturbed by the feeling that Rogan and Smith were defending mates with, frankly, appalling views, even mentioning an incident involving Holocaust memorial desecration.
Wow. And his final point there is about ideological consistency.
Yeah, basically saying, just as the left should reject its extremist fringes, the right needs to be absolutely clear in rejecting any flirtation with Hitlerism or similar ideologies. Seems obvious, but he felt the need to state it.
Which brings us to the deeply concerning rise of anti-Semitism. Murray connects the dots between that cultural right revisionism and this broader trend.
He does. But he also points squarely at left-wing anti-Israel sentiment, citing things like those shocking Yale protest students in Hamas headbands, harassing Jewish students.
So it's coming from different directions, which historically often signals a deeper societal malaise, right?
That's the historical understanding, yeah. Anti-Semitism as a canary in the coal mine. Murray is careful, saying he doesn't want to over- or underdiagnose, but the signs are worrying.
His book, he says, tries to understand why so many people seem to struggle to see the moral difference between Israel, a democracy, and groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, which he calls a death cult.
He seems genuinely baffled by it, especially after the sheer brutality of October 7th, which Hamas broadcast. He compares it to Nazis broadcasting atrocities and asks how so much of the elite could seem to side with the perpetrators.
He mentions the problems in elite universities the rot, but cautions against thinking it represents all ordinary Americans.
True, but then he points to these polls showing significant numbers of young Americans sympathizing with Hamas.
Fueled by TikTok and Twitch, he suggests, so it's not just campuses.
No. And he thinks part of it is that the inoculation that came from understanding the Holocaust has faded for younger generations.
And he offers a psychological explanation too, projection.
Right. The idea that Western youth taught about their own country's historical sins, stolen land, colonialism, etc.,
Hmm.
project that guilt onto Israel, seeing them through that lens.
Plus, he mentions foreign funding, like from a Qatar or China,
Yeah.
potentially amplifying anti-American and anti-Israel narratives in universities.
It's a complex mix of factors,
Huh.
but that projection mechanism seems key to understanding some of the dynamics.
The example he gives of the protests at the Nova Party Memorial, that's just chilling.
Unbelievably so. People celebrating murder, blaming victims, and that poor father who lost his daughters having to walk past that in New York City. Murray uses the word evil deliberately there.
And he insists this isn't just Israel's problem, it's about a moral decay in the West.
Absolutely. He completely rejects moral relativism on this. He's clear. He knows which side is right and wants the death cult defeated.
He also calls out the hypocrisy, like the denial of Hamas's documented rapes while accusing the IDF, especially given the Believe All Women movement.
And he asks, where are the mass protests against Hamas? Why do the loudest voices seem to align with, well, with evil?
He uses history to show how people can end up supporting terrible things, thinking they're doing good. It's why he insists on using that word evil.
But he also ends that thought with a note of hope, comparing Hamas's ideology to the Japanese emperor cult, which seemed invincible but was ultimately defeated.
Okay, let's touch on some Q&A points. The link between anti-Churchill views on the new right and anti-Semitism.
Murray brings in René Girard here, the idea of the perennial scapegoat. He suggests isolationist views often find a Jewish scapegoat to blame for wars, pointing to examples where Jewish advisors get blamed while non-Jewish leaders don't.
Interesting. And his advice on Ivy League graduation disruptions.
Pretty direct. Demand administrators prevent it and confront protesters, unmask them if they're proud of their views. It's about accountability.
And the big question, what can we do?
His answers are practical. Identify and call out anti-Semitism and anti-Americanism, even on your own side. Use your voice. Face-to-face conversations matter.
He shares that personal story about the student at Oxford changing his mind on the Second Intifada through conversation.
Yeah, illustrating the power of direct engagement. He believes truth can puncture the darkness, make people feel less alone. Changing minds takes time, but even planting one fact helps.
It's about perseverance, isn't it?
Exactly. Don't feel powerless.
Finally, the interviewer asks Murray about his own dedication to covering this conflict, given he's not Jewish or a traditional foreign correspondent.
Yeah, what drives him personally?
His answer is layered. A hatred of lies, especially about Israel, an emotional connection, a belief that Israel is the first target for those wanting to tear down Western civilization.
He talks about the Bible, Jerusalem, its foundational role in the West, and how the anti-Israel movement misunderstands that.
Right. And that anti-Semitism is always a precursor to worse things, but also a deep belief in Israel's determination to survive. He quotes Golda Meir, "We have nowhere else to go."
And that line from the Samsa, I shall not die, I shall live. A powerful response to Dell calls for destruction. It really shows the depth of his commitment.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, we've covered a lot. The potential complexities of Trump's first 100 days, the rise of illiberalism on left and right, and this deeply worrying surge in anti-Semitism and historical distortion.
The need for critical thinking, for resisting those easy, hateful narratives seems clearer than ever. Hopefully, this discussion has given you, the listener, a more nuanced way to look at these things.
And we'll leave you with this thought from Murray, that the fight against anti-Semitism, the defense of Israel, is actually tied directly to defending Western values and rejecting these nihilistic death cults.
What does that connection mean for how you engage with these issues? Something to really think about.